everyone. My name is Rachel Fiore. I'm one of the adult services librarians here at the Whittier Public Library. Before we get started, I just want to mention we are recording the Zoom as you just heard. And if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into the chat, and then I'll relay those questions for you towards the end when we do a Q&A. And just go ahead and keep your cameras off and your sound on mute. And I think that's it. So welcome to our book discussion of A Fire Story by Brian Fies, which is a part of our Book to Action program. This is brought to you by our California Center for the Book Grant. And also thank you to the Whittier Public Foundation for sponsoring our event too. Tonight, we are happy to have Brian with us. Brian created the graphic novels A Fire Story, which we'll be talking about tonight, Mom's Cancer, Whatever Happened to the World of Tomorrow, and The Last Mechanical Monster. His work has received several honors, including the comic industry's Eisner, Harvey, and Inkpot Awards, as well as a television Emmy Award. Thank you for being here, Brian. I'm going to turn it over to you to go ahead and share your screen and do whatever you wanted to do.
Thanks very much. I trust you can still hear me, Rachel. Thank you so much for being here. I really so wish we could do these things in person, but you know, the nice thing about this is we'll at least have some interaction, but in person is better. But this is good. If it were real life, I'm not sure I'd be able to be there at all. So this is much better than that. And thank you very much. Thank you for hosting me. Thanks for coming. I do have some graphics, a slideshow I'd like to show you. So I'm going to share my screen here. Make sure I get the right one. And if you see a bunch of orange, that's me. That's the proper, that's what I want you to see.
We see it on there.
Good, thanks. So I just want to talk a little bit, and Rachel was kind enough to mention some of my other work, and I want to kind of talk about how I got to be a person who thought it'd be a good idea to make a comic about my house and 6,000 other houses burning down. It's not an obvious first choice. As she mentioned, I did do a comic called Mom's Cancer was my first published graphic novel. And I'm one of those people who wanted to be a cartoonist my whole life and tried and failed in many different ways to be a cartoonist, some sort of an artist. But I was a writer. I'd been a journalist. You know, I had some background in writing for newspapers and magazines. When my mom was diagnosed and began treatment for cancer, when I was in my early 40s, I knew I wanted to tell our family story somehow. And I didn't know if I wanted to tell it in the form of a magazine article or a book, even though I had no idea how books got published. And one day then I took my mom to chemotherapy. And if you and yours have been through chemotherapy, you know it's boring, but I'd taken along some paperwork and I turned a piece of paper over while Mom was napping through her chemotherapy and you know, receiving the IV. And I drew this sketch. And in this sketch of her napping in the chair, with a strawberry and milkshake on the table beside her and a syringe there and a walking stick that she had whittled herself and, you know, just a box of Kleenex on the other side table. I realized that this sketch captured more about what that day and what that experience was like for me and my family than I could have said in 100,000 words. And so I resolved then that I was going to tell our family story in the form of a graphic novel, of a comic, which started as a webcomic actually, and then became a published comic, a print comic. And so that picture became this finished version of the same in the book. I followed that, as again, Rachel was kind enough to mention, with a book called Whatever Happened to the World of Tomorrow, also published by Abrams, as Mom's Cancer was. And this was a book about a very personal book close to my heart about being a space age kid and getting to my age and wondering why I wasn't living on the moon with a jetpack. So it's kind of about that arc of American history from utopian optimism to dystopian pessimism, how we went from thinking tomorrow would always be great to thinking tomorrow's going to be terrible, as many of us think now or tend to think. I followed that with a web comic called The Last Mechanical Monster, which is just a fun story about an old man and his giant robot, because I just wanted to make a fun comic after making two pretty serious comics. And This is going to be a book published by Abrams also early next year. We're just finishing up the work on that now. So The Last Mechanical Monster will be my next project. And that was pretty much the extent of my comics career as of the night of October 9th, 2017, when a fire 20 miles away reached me in about 4 hours. And I saw this coming over the horizon toward me at about 1 in the morning. This is a picture I took from our front yard of fire roaring down a canyon with 60, 70 mile per hour winds, devouring land at the rate of a football field's worth every 2 or 3 seconds, coming toward my neighborhood, my house, with absolutely no warning. We went to bed about 10:30 the night before, having no inkling this was heading toward us. This is another picture of our fire. These are the firestorms. The Tubbs fire was the one that got me, but there were about 8 firestorms the same night with names like Nuns Canyon and so forth. I did not take this picture. And all of these lights down here are overexposed street lights, but off on the horizon, everything you see glowing off on the horizon is my fire, the Tubbs fire. And as best as I've been able to figure, my house is somewhere smack in the middle of Mordor here. So the night of October 9th, my house burned down. My wife and I escaped with about 15 minutes notice and managed to save a few things and get in our car and get out of the neighborhood. I walked back in the next morning, not at all sure what I would find. I did not know our neighborhood had been destroyed yet. The news was very spotty. I started walking about 3 miles as soon as the sun rose. There were yet no police or fire barricades to stop me because they were still very busy trying to fight the fire in other places. And as I walked into my neighborhood the next morning, I saw scenes like this. This is my street. These are my trees over here. These redwood trees were in my front yard. This is the street I lived on. And this is my house. This was the walkway to my house. This was a refrigerator. This is a washer and or dryer, I'm not sure which. And in the back here, you can still see little spot fires still burning. I think those are coming from natural gas lines that hadn't been turned off yet. So this is my house. This is my yard. And as I walked back into my neighborhood, not even knowing yet that it had been destroyed, I had already resolved, I knew that I was going to tell this story somehow. I'd been a journalist, I'd been a newspaper reporter before. I'd had the experience of Mom's cancer, of telling a serious story about a serious subject in the form of a comic. So I knew that would work. And I started observing as I walked into my neighborhood. I started taking pictures because I knew I'd be drawing this later. And I went to Target the next day, and I bought shoes, and I bought a shirt, and I bought art supplies. And I'm actually going to pull out of screen sharing for a second to show you, because this is something I can't do usually. I don't usually bring this anywhere, but I bought a notebook from Target that looks like this. And I borrowed this little pencil case from my daughters, whom we lived with for a month after the fire. And I bought 4 color highlighters, a couple of Sharpies, and the day after the fire, I started writing and drawing our story in this notebook. And the pictures I drew looked like this. I drew something like 16 or 17 or 18 pages in the course of 3 days, which, if you know anything about how comics get made, is a pretty good clip. I'm going back to screen sharing now, so I hope that works. If it doesn't, let me know. And that's a picture I drew. And as I said, as I walked back into my neighborhood the morning after the fire, I was taking pictures because I knew I'd use them as source material for this comic I would be drawing. And so I took a picture of this fire hose split and melted in the street, and I turned it into this drawing. I took a picture of a neighbor's basketball hoop that had fallen down and melted in the street, and that was the source material for this drawing. And this is probably about 7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock. So there's still smoke in the air. There's still ash falling down, which you can't see, but it looked like snow. And these are my mailboxes on the corner, my neighborhood's mailboxes. That's my mailbox down there in this lower corner, just melted in place like hot summer taffy. And I already showed you a picture similar to this of the front of my house, but this is the drawing that I interpreted that photo as. So as I say, I just wanted to get this story out. And as I had with mom's cancer, I knew right away that the quickest, cheapest, easiest way to do that was to put it online. So I had a blog at the time, and I still have the blog actually. And I just started posting the pages to the blog as I had them done, keeping in mind that this was not the most important thing in my life at the time. My house had just burned down, and I was very busy with dealing with a lot of other things you deal with when your house burns down. But I felt compelled to tell our story. I felt compelled to get it out. And I think part of that was sort of the journalist in me. I realized I was at the center of a newsworthy historic event, and I felt like I had a duty to tell the story. I wanted to get it out. So I started posting pages to my blog, and I told some friends, go look at my blog, tell me what you think about this. And they told some friends and told some friends. And within about a week, something like 500,000 people had gone and read my blog, which is remarkable. It went viral real quick. And the best reaction I got, the most gratifying reaction I got to this first webcomic, these first 18 pages I put online, was from people who said, I saw your fire in the news, but your story was the first thing I read that made me feel what it was like to be there. And that was, that meant the most to me, because that was what I was trying to accomplish. Actually, that meant second most to me. What meant the most to me was, well, I heard from other people who'd lost their homes in the same event who said, your fire expressed what I was what I was feeling in ways I couldn't tell myself. That was the best reaction. That really touched my heart. That meant the most. So I put it online. A lot of people came and saw it. San Francisco PBS station KQED approached me after a couple of weeks and said, hey, would you mind if we animated that thing? And I said, knock yourselves out. I'm not going to animate it. So they did a animated version that I think about 300,000 people saw. And as again, Rachel was kind enough to mention, won an Emmy Award. So I got that going for me. So I bought a tux and I charged that to my insurance company, and I went and won a News Emmy Award, which are not the big Hollywood awards you see, but it's the same award run by the same organization. They give them to, newscasts, local newscasts and such, for feature stories and news stories and sports stories and all the stories. So from that, I had the opportunity, my editor at Abrams, whom I'd done 2 other books with, dropped me an email and said, hey, Brian, no pressure, but if you ever want to turn that fire story into a book, we'd be happy to publish it. And I said, you bet. And that's the book I did, and that's the book you read. And I wanted to do a couple things with the book. I'm going to take it out of screen share again, because again, this is a nice thing we can do in this medium that we probably wouldn't be able to do as well in person. Is I wanted to do a few things. I wanted to expand the story in time and space, because I realized that first 18-page webcomic was just my perspective in the middle of the event, in the first few days of the event, and my immediate family, right? So it was a few people in a very short time frame. And if I were going to tell the story in a book, I wanted to tell it about more people, I wanted to tell it about more time, and I wanted to tell it about more space, because I realized that my perspective, as hard as I would try, was very limited by where I was, who I was, my socioeconomic condition, what had happened to me was not necessarily the same thing that happened to everybody else. So I wanted to get other people's perspectives, give some context to the fire about how it happened, and so on. And I also took the opportunity to just redraw some things, because those first 18 pages I put online were very rough, right? I did them with Sharpies and highlighters, and did them as fast as I could, and they looked like this. And when it came time to do the book, I was able to take pages that looked like that and make it look like that instead. So I had to work at a whole different scale, a whole different medium. Print is just a different medium than web. And I really looked at the web comic as a rough draft of what I hoped and thought might become a bigger, better book later. So it came to pass. It's a book. I'm going back into the slides now. So yes, you've seen that if you've read the book, and that's the on the right is the finished colored version of the page that I just showed you the hand drawing of. So I got to expand the story in time and place. I got to talk about us evacuating from our home, driving down 101, Highway 101, looking up at a hotel on fire up on the hill, and these barricades, these guardrails afire like torches along the path of a marauding army kind of thing. It was just so strange, so violent, and frightening. So I'd like to do a reading, and I don't know if you all have read the book, I had a chance, but I'd like to do a reading of some bits from the book. And this is sometime later. We're living in my daughter's apartment in Novato, about 40 miles away. We've got our dog and our cat, and I'm trying to get some things done. So I call PG&E and say, yes, I need to cancel our gas and electric service. We lost our home in the wildfires. And a very nice person on the other line says, I'm so sorry, sir. We can take care of that right away. I just need to ask a few questions. Are you transferring service to another address? Eventually, we don't know where yet. Are there any fences or locked gates blocking the electric meter? No, the entire neighborhood burned to the ground. I'm sorry, but I need to go down the checklist. No fences or gates. Do you plan to move any gas appliances? I don't have any appliances, gas or otherwise. Are there dogs on the property? You understand what happened, right? The checklist? No dogs. And will our workers have clear access to the gas meter? I take a second to process that. Unlimited access, but there's no gas meter there anymore. I called our auto insurance. And what is the estimated repair cost? Same guy, same voice. Whatever it would cost to buy another 5-year-old Honda. So you would describe the vehicle as a total loss? Yes, it's totally totaled. Oh, I see. I took some pictures I can send to you. Do they show the license plate or vehicle ID number? No, those melted. So as I said a minute ago, I really wanted the print version of a fire story to tell other people's stories. So I went and interviewed people, some of whom I knew and some of whom I just found. Sometimes people ask, well, how did you find these people to interview? And the fact was you couldn't throw a rock without hitting somebody who had just a horrific fire story. So some I stumbled across, like Sonny, the construction worker. He was working on my block, and I just sat down with him while he was having lunch, and he told me a story, his story about having served in the Army and how, his experience with the fire compared to his experience in the Army. And these are frankly my favorite parts of the print fire story, are these interviews with other people. And I hope you will pause to read them, because I think they're important in many ways. First, they illustrate the different experiences people have, but they also illustrate some of the similarities we experienced. For example, almost everybody I talked to said, I don't need help, give it to somebody who's worse off than I am. And so it's that combination of kind of pride and charity that drove people to refuse help when they were the very people who needed it the most. I'm talking about people who'd lost everything and had no shoes, who were saying, no, give it to somebody who's worse off than I am. I found that remarkable. The other thing I found just curious as heck was almost everybody I talked to said that they evacuated planning to be gone for 2 days. Be away from the house for 2 days. Not 1 day, not 3 days, not 4 days. They packed, if they had time to pack, they packed 2 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of underwear. They packed enough for 2 days. And I just wondered what was so magical about 2 days. Maybe just because that was, a short enough time to figure, well, they'll have it solved by then. But if you planned a longer time, maybe that would be too frightening to think about. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it was with 2 days, but I noticed that. I also wanted to give some context, talk about our drought, which you all are very familiar with down there. So I don't have to tell you about it. But up here in Northern California, we've got, we've got this Mediterranean climate where it rains in the winter and then it's dry from, say February to November or December. So we've got these, grass-covered hills. And in 2017, we had an ongoing drought that had just broken the year before. So the rain very generously nurtured all these grasses to grow even bigger and more vigorously than they had before. So by the time October rolls around, all these grasses had dried into a real carpet of kindling. And I wanted to talk about that in the book. I was, kind of hinting around the edges of climate change. In 2017, when the book came out, the hardcover, I was reluctant to really hit climate change on the head because, ours was kind of, it seemed like a one-off. It seemed like the kind of thing that could happen once just by weird chance. And then after the hardcover came out, after 2017, there were fire after fire after fire. Every year there was 100-year fire somewhere. And it became very clear to me that this was not a one-off. This was part of a pattern. And in the paperback, which I believe you all have read, I come down a little more strongly in the case on the side that, yes, this is the first salvo in a climate change war that we don't know exactly how to fight. And I was a physics major in college, so just the science of fire fascinated me. And I examined my house to see what was melted, and then looked up at what point those things would melt. And I was astonished that everything metal rusted in one night. You come back and it just looks like it'd been out in the rain for 30 years. And as I say down in here in this caption, I didn't know fire could do that. It was again, both kind of horrific and fascinating at the same time. I think I'm not hooked up right. So you've already discovered a problem with doing a reading of a graphic novel, which is that y'all can read faster than I can talk. So I've done an experiment here of doing a reading without showing you the words. So if you've read the book, you've seen this already, but I like to do this reading with no words. And in this one, Karen and I are sifting through our yard using archaeological equipment we borrowed from our daughter, and a chaplain comes up to console us. So I say up here, "Ah, hell, here comes the chaplain." And Karen says, "Your turn." Aid groups send around crisis counselors from time to time. "Hi, you folks need some water?" They were kind, earnest people who meant painfully well. "Thanks. We set up a food truck a few blocks over. Free falafels. We'll come by in a while. Thank you. How are y'all doing?" "Oh, same as everybody. Yeah, I've seen a lot of blocks that look just like this. At least we all got out alive. There was an older couple over that way who got trapped in their garage. We heard. Horrible. But at least they perished together. Well, we're grateful. Not as bad as Hurricane Katrina, though. I saw bodies floating in ditches there." The chaplain and I take a moment. And I go, but he gives us our water bottles and goes on about his way. And I go back to work, and Karen says, "How'd it go?" And I said, "Pretty well. He just needed someone to talk to." So, at the time, this struck me as funny. It also struck me as just incredibly sad, because this man who obviously traveled the country from disaster to disaster trying to help people, had been so damaged by them himself, had seen so much, had such PTSD, that he was more or less worthless to us and needed more help than we did. So there's some humor in that, of the helper becoming the one who needs the help, some irony, but I think there's also sort of a deep sadness there that stays with me even now. 3.5 years after our fire. It's just this poor man who was just doing his best and had done it a little too long, I think. One of my favorite parts of the book is just very simple. It's Karen and I lying in bed, and she wakes up and she says, "I just want to go home." I say, "Yeah, me too." And that's it. That's what it's all about. We just want to go home. And if you ask anybody who's in my situation, that's all they say. We just want to go home, and there is no going home. You can build a new home, but there's no going to the old home. So the hardcover ended with this image. And daffodils, several months after the fire, daffodils sprouted up through the ashes and brought these beautiful green and gold colors to this plain of gray. And I never, ever tell anybody how to read or interpret my books or the message they're supposed to take away from it. But if somebody wanted to look at this picture of daffodils and see something here about renewal and about life emerging from death, I would not discourage that interpretation. So then I had, so the opportunity arose to do this as a paperback, to put out a paperback edition several months later. And I was talking to my editor at Abrams about it. And I said, a lot has happened since the hardcover came out. Could I add 16 pages? And he said, yeah, that'd be great, because then I could put new and improved on the cover. That'd be fantastic. So I started working on the 16 pages. And then we had another fire called the Kincaid Fire, which started in a different place and traveled a different route, but looked like it was going to end up right back at my house, another 50,000 acre fire. And we evacuated again, and we prepared for the worst. And I called up my editor and I said, I need another 16 pages, but now I know how the story is going to end. And so the paperback you have there has 32 new pages that the hardcover doesn't. And those 32 pages start with this: time passing of the daffodils wilting and sprouting and wilting and sprouting, and 2 years passes. Those of you who might be unfamiliar with graphic novels and comics, I love to use this page as an illustration of the power of comics to just very simply show, to tell a story, to tell the story about time passing, to tell a story about flowers blooming and dying and blooming and dying. In 15 panels, you get a sense of what these 2 years have been like, not just for the daffodils, but for all of us. And so the new material in the paperback has pages like this: Karen and I sitting around talking, and this says Karen and I are even keeled, but there are, I can't read the very top, it's off the top of my screen, but there are still, I can't read it. You should think I should know it, I haven't memorized. Traumatic stimuli that can shoot a potent dose of adrenaline into our bloodstreams. Karen says wood smoke, and I say sirens. Karen says strong wind, especially strong dry wind from the east. I complete the thought. Karen says roaring sounds. I say traveling the same route I walked home the morning after the fire. Karen says helicopters at night. I say reminders of that 2017 solar eclipse that the girls and I drove to Oregon to see. It had nothing to do with the fire, but it was so close in time that they've become entwined in my mind. Karen says the Macy Gray song, Beauty in the World, which I cry to in my car every day so I wouldn't cry at work. I say the Toy Story movies. I lost my childhood teddy bear in the fire. I know he wasn't really alive, but he was when I was 3. And that's straight from life. I mean, that's a quote. I think Toy Story 4 came out after our fire, and we went and saw it. And I was just devastated. As the toys faced their demise, I couldn't help but think of, my own toys, and by extension, my own everything that I'd lost at the same time. Karen says escape routes, every room, every hotel, every city. I always make sure I have a way out. It's a weird set of triggers, but manageable. And I just have one more little thing, because this moved me very much. I did a little book tour with the hardcover before the COVID days. And I met this woman up in Ukiah, actually. And I said, I've met other fire survivors who share my irrational shame that I let down history. She told me, I was the keeper of my family's past. I had everyone's antiques from the old country, all their treasures. Some of them were more than 400 years old. My great-grandparents packed them up, brought them to America, carried them across the country, and entrusted them to me, and I let them burn. There's nothing you could have done. It doesn't matter. It happened on my watch. In the chain of posterity, we were the links that broke. And I feel that very strongly. I feel that sense of responsibility. I had things from my grandparents and my great grandparents and so forth that that I lost, and somehow they managed to not lose them in 100 years of owning them, and I lost them all in one night. And I feel that very deeply. I know it's not rational, but it is real, and it's common among folks in my situation. I've found. I won't read that one. I'll let you go. I just want to say before we start talking about questions, I sent to Rachel and these book plates, and if you don't have one or can't get one, let me stop screen sharing. I have them, and a book plate is just basically a sticker that, in lieu of a signed book, which I would love to be there and talk with you and listen to your stories and sign books for you, but I can't do that. But if you want, I will email me, and I will send you a signed book plate to stick in your book and make it as good as signed. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Brian, for sharing that with us, the slides. That was great. Those first photos you posted made me think about that. I think that one line in the beginning that sticks out with me every time I even see the book is when you said, I inhaled my neighbors' lives, which was very profound and moving and so scary. Yeah, that was
Thank you.
devastating. I'm going to go ahead and open up the chat for questions. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in, and I will relay them to Brian. I like the way you added those stories about your neighbors and some of the people you found in the neighborhood after. Did a lot of those neighbors end up coming back? I know in the story it was taking some time for some of them, a bit longer than it was for you.
Yeah, Larry and Mary, the couple. Larry's the FBI agent who used his FBI training to start, diagnosing, going CSI on his own crime scene, sort of. And they live across the street from us. They are very good friends of ours, and they moved back to the neighborhood. Many of the people have settled well. Jerry Dunn, the gentleman who lost his partner, and their older friend Bill Reynolds, is back in his house now. And he's actually found new love, which we're all very happy about. Other people are less settled. Dottie, the woman who lived in the motorhome, took years to find a place to live, and she's still very unsettled and very unhappy. She's safe. She's in a good place, but she was never able to go back to her motorhome. She was never able to re-inhabit it, and it actually got bulldozed just a short while ago. And we're talking now 3 years after the fire. She's living in this uncertainty of, will I ever be able to go back home? And the answer was no. There's no other thing to do but to bulldoze what's left of your home. And I think it just broke her heart. So, she's in a good place. She's safe, but her ending, I would not say is, particularly constructive or happy one. But most of the rest of us, through various struggles and rebuilding a home in a place that's lost 6,000 homes is a very daunting struggle. Most of us have started those new lives, Mm-hmm. You never get the old life back, and the sadness of what you've lost never leaves you, but you start a new life sort of from scratch on that day. It's the fire for me is one of those events that always splits your life into the life you had before and the life you had after. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I can compare it to is when my daughters were born. Mm-hmm. That day, before that day, I wasn't a parent. After that day, I was a parent. Well, the other dividing line of my life is before the fire and after the fire. And there's just, those don't mix, Yeah. Yeah.
And how is it living now well, actually, let me ask this question from Edna. Probably lead into that is, have you rebuilt, and if so, is there something you'd have done differently to protect your valuables? Amazing story. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. We did rebuild, and we built in the exact same place, which some people said, what? One reason we came back is because all of our neighbors said they were going to come back. And so we were all kind of, a team pulling together, and almost all of them did. And I think that's wonderful. We really love this neighborhood. We couldn't think of where else we'd want to go. And the insurance industry is sort of built to very strongly encourage you to rebuild, as opposed to taking the money and going somewhere else and buying something or building somewhere else. They really like it when you rebuild what you've lost, unless you're in a very high risk area, in which case they discourage you, but we weren't in that situation. We thought about it. We sort of, we're an earthquake country. Everybody in California is an earthquake country, but we are too. And you sort of take that 100,000-year bet, that it's not going to happen while I'm here. It might happen 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, but please not while I'm here. And the thinking was and is that our fire burned through about 60 or 70 years worth of fuel growth, and all that fuel's gone. So maybe another fire like ours would be possible in 50 or 60 or 70 years, but not now. And we were almost proven wrong by the Kincaid fire, which, as I said, sort of came from a different direction, but was aimed right at us until the firefighters made a very valiant stand to save our neighborhood, save a lot of neighborhoods. The other thing is fire codes are so much better, and fire safety awareness is so much better than it was. Our original house was built about 30 years ago in the mid 80s. And even just since then, I mean, that's not that long ago, but even just since then, new houses in, I think, all of California, but at least in our county, are required to have sprinklers, interior sprinklers. So now we've all got sprinkler systems. They're required to have eave designs that don't let fire get up under the eaves and into the roofs, into the attics. They're required to be built of material called hardy plank is the commercial name for it, but it's basically kind of a wood concrete mixture, so that the things that look like boards on the side of your house are actually very, very hard to ignite. They just don't catch fire as easily as they used to. They're not fireproof. Nothing's fireproof, but it's a lot harder. And at the same time, our county has put up on different hilltops and mountaintops around the county 50 infrared cameras, so that, in 2017, our fire started 15 miles away, and nobody had any idea where it was going, what was going on. Nobody had any idea. They couldn't get helicopters up. It was the middle of the night and there's too much smoke and stuff going on. They couldn't see it. Now with these cameras, they can see them when they start, and they pour every resource they've got on that thing and put it out immediately. It's the difference between 2017 and 2021 is night and day. It's amazing. So I'm fairly confident that we're not due for a repeat. And I really just hope I'm not wrong about that, because some days when the wind's blowing and it's hot and it's dry, and I just look up at those hills and I just say, oh, geez, this is exactly what it was like then, but we've been okay so far. And I think we will be. But some people it just unnerved them, so they had to leave. They just couldn't live here anymore. I sure understand that. I absolutely understand that. It feels too dangerous to them. They just couldn't take it, and they left, and bless their hearts, I'm sure they're happier and sleep better wherever they are. But we like it here, so we stayed.
Yeah, that's understandable for sure, that if you'd want to move, but it was nice that you were able to rebuild and you feel safe there. And do you think the alerts, you mentioned the alerts in the book, do you think that's gotten better?
Yeah.
The alerts that would go out?
Yeah, they've ironed that out. They've had some drills. They say they've got all the conflicts and miscommunication that happened in 2017. They say they've got that ironed out. I tend to believe them, because it was horrible for them too. They don't want to go through that again. So I think they understand their systems better. They have a system in place that so that the different agencies, the county fire and the city fires departments and all the people in charge of things, there's more of a command structure of who calls who decides what, who gets what done. I think, our county, Sonoma County, has been very aggressive and very smart about planning for the next one.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Molly has a couple of questions. The first one is, what do you attribute to protecting the relationship between you and Karen because of this tragedy and its harmful effects?
Well, that's a real interesting question because, we know a few people who just as a result of the fire ended up getting divorced. It was just too stressful. And you start trying to decide how to, if you want to rebuild a house together, and then you start thinking about, well, do we really want to be together? You know, um, Karen and I had no such problems, and I think that's probably just due to dumb luck in our personalities, but we were in it together. We were in it together. And what was nice, what's been nice and continues to be nice, is that we both have really bad days when we're really sad and just down in the dumps, but we never have them at the same time. So when she's having a really bad day, I'm there to kind of support and lift her to the extent I can. And when I'm having a bad day, she does the same for me. And the other thing we know about it is if the other partner's having a bad day, just let him have a bad day. You can't fix the problem. Sometimes you're just sad, and it's right to be sad, and you have a reason to be sad. And sometimes you just have to let somebody be sad, you know? So we're good about reading each other that way. But really right from the start, we were in it together. I mean, I say in the book, I called Karen from the street in front of our house, from the very spot you saw in that picture. And I told her, everything's gone. And the first thing she said was, well, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. And they're just that kind of calm, just very rational. Okay. And that's what you do. You just start a list. You just, day one, you list 10 things and you check them off. And then day two, you list another 10 things.
Seems like maybe her job as working in that field, right, might have helped to help keep her calm.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, she was actually part of our county's emergency response team. She wasn't a major part of it, but she had a lot to do with opening up shelters and things like that. And so, first of all, she was very, very busy. But second of all, she sort of had this even keeled demeanor that I think helped pull us both through very nicely. Yeah.
It's very nice. She also said, Molly said, the narrative that you write and draw about, do you feel it allowed you to grieve in a sense?
That's a really interesting question, because I have an answer that I think may not be what you'd expect. The first answer is yes. I mean, this is how I process things. It's how I processed my mother's illness, and it's how I processed my house going away, was just the act of writing it down and drawing pictures. And it's how I work through it. It's how I understand what it was and what caused it and what it's done to me is I understand those things through the act of writing and drawing about them. And so I think that's therapeutic. I think that's helpful. But at the same time, writing a book like this, that's, 192 pages, takes a long time. And you have to think about it a lot. And you're sort of always, you can stay stuck in that space. You can stay stuck in that time because you have to remember what it's like to write about it. And so, here it is 3.5 years after my house burned down, and I'm still talking to people about the night my house burned down. Other people don't do that. So I think, yes, it's therapeutic and it's helpful, and it's how I work. It's how my brain sort of needs to work. But at the same time, I'm not sure it's healthy in the long run, because I think you can kind of get stuck and dwell on it too much. And, but that's okay. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to talk about it. I mean, I really, really am. But I think I may not, as I said earlier, as I joked earlier, I may not be hooked up right.
I think this next comment actually from Molly I agree with this. She says the narrative that you write and draw about. I'm sorry, excuse me. Your account gives us an honest, firsthand perspective of what your reality was and is, and thank you for allowing us to walk the vivid pages with you.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. I really appreciate that, because what I try to do in everything I do is be as honest as I can, because I figure that's the only way it'll have any value. And if I try to sugarcoat anything, or if I try to make myself look good, or if I try to tell a story the way you think it ought to go instead of the way it actually went, then people could tell. People can detect that. People can tell authentic from inauthentic, or authentic to unnatural, to wrong, just wrong. And so I appreciate that very much. I think I sort of approach everything I write as journalism, even if it's a story like Whatever Happened to the World of Tomorrow or Last Mechanical Monster that I make up. I still tell the story as honestly and truly and directly as I can, even if I'm making it up. And in fact, I think sometimes it's even more important to be as honest as you can when you make up the story, because you have to build the world for the reader and make them feel like it's a real place. But I appreciate that. Thank you, because I try to pick those moments and tell the story, and I try really hard to just be as objective as I can, understanding that objectivity is impossible when you are the story.
I think reading it too in this medium really connected you with it and really let you feel all the things that you're going through. Like she said, just seeing the pictures to go along with it was really powerful.
Yeah, I thank you for that too. And that's one thing I really love about the graphic novel medium, the comics, is this combination of words and pictures that together combine to be more powerful than words or pictures by themselves. And what a comic can accomplish by having words with pictures is the words can be doing one thing, the pictures can be doing something else, and they encourage the reader to knit them together to glean meaning from that combination of words plus pictures in that, so that the writer doesn't have to tell you what to think. You figure it out yourself. You solve the puzzle yourself by putting the words and pictures together. That's very satisfying. And when it's really working right, it feels like a direct tap from my head into yours. You're just reading the book and it sounds like we're having a conversation. Just me and you, just sitting in a room, we're just talking. And when it really works, it's very powerful medium like that. Very intimate.
Absolutely. Edna asks, any ideas what your next book might be about?
Well, I do have The Last Mechanical Monster coming out, which was a webcomic I did about 5 years ago. So it's actually predates A Fire Story. And I'm very excited about it. And it's just a sweet story. I did it sort of at a time when I needed to remind myself that comics can be for adults and comics can be serious, but sometimes comics should just be fun. And so I just want to tell a fun story. And so that'll be out at the end of this year, the beginning of next. And then I have a really cool idea for something I'd like to start working on right now. I haven't quite worked it out, but if I do it, it will be unpublishable. It'll be something that can only be experienced in person. So I have no business sense at all. We'll see if I can pull it off. But I do have other ideas. I have more ideas than I have time to do with. And so sometimes people say, hey, you know what, can you work on a project with me? And the answer is always no, because I just have too many projects of my own that I could live another 40, 50 years and not finish all the projects I have.
That one sounds very intriguing. And then, Angelina asked, I think, have you always written graphic novels and do you just prefer that? Have you written any other nonfiction books without it being a graphic novel?
Nothing published. It's a interesting question to me because I think of everything I do as writing. It's just sometimes I write with pictures, and those are my comics. But I had a short career as a newspaper reporter, and then a pretty good career as a freelance writer and as a science writer. I was a science writer for a long time, writing about scientific subjects, usually in the energy industry and renewable power. I'd write like real academic articles for trade press that were only read by people who made solar panels and stuff. I wrote articles for people like that. So I've got a real breadth, but I've not written a prose novel. I've always wanted to be a cartoonist of some sort. I grew up reading newspaper comics and comic books and always wanted to do it. And in my late teens and early 20s, I tried really hard to become a professional cartoonist. And like many people in many creative fields, I failed. I did not, I got some nice feedback and I did some freelance things here and there. I got to illustrate a light bulb catalog once, and they come in an amazing assortment of shapes and sizes. But I had other careers and I got married, but I still always kept drawing and kept cartooning, kept creating. And Mom's Cancer was really my first opportunity to apply that in a real kind of commercial, to get it published as a book. But until then, I was in my early 40s when that happened. And so from the age of 3 to about 42, I was a very passionate amateur cartoonist. And when I was 42, I became a professional at it.
That's really great. With this grant, we've been learning a couple of things about wildfires, and a lot of it's been eye-opening and surprising to me. Um, what do you think are the most common misconceptions that people have about wildfires and the damage they do and how they're handled?
Well, my keen insight was that the problem in our case, and I think most of the big firestorms California and the West Coast have experienced, is the problem is not the fire, it's the wind. You get these hot, dry winds roaring from the east out of Nevada over the Sierra Nevada. And these winds are going 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. And they're the things that blow a small fire into a conflagration that's going horizontal. The fire is going horizontal and there's no stopping it. So, if you want to talk about it in the context of climate change, what's happening is more thermal energy is being pumped into the atmosphere. That energy has to go somewhere, and it comes out in the form of kinetic energy as wind. Thermal energy is transformed into kinetic energy, and that means we're going to have more wind, and they'll be more violent, they'll be more frequent. And so I think that's, the idea that fire bad, yes, fire's bad, but it's the wind that makes the fire into these monster killers. Sonoma County had a fire actually very similar to our 2017 fire in 1964, but the 1964 fire took 4 days to cover the same amount of territory that my fire covered in 4 hours because of the wind, right? And so when you got 4 days, well, you got time to evacuate. You could get everybody out of the way, and you can, protect individual properties. And it was a much less damaging fire, which leads to my second point, is that in 1964, there weren't people living in a lot of these places that there are now. And so that's the other thing. We're sort of encroaching into the places where maybe it's more dangerous to live than, down in the flatlands close to water. People are living back in these gated communities, back in these hills, back in these mountains and these valleys, and they are very pretty, but if there's only one road in and out and there's a fire, you're in big trouble. So I think there's a lot of more thought that maybe ought to go into, zoning, things like that, just sort of the nuts and bolts of deciding who lives where. And nobody likes to be bossed around by the government. And if somebody had come to me and said, after our fire, and said, Brian, we can't let you rebuild because it's too dangerous, I would have punched him in the nose, because, and I don't know if anybody should be told that, but I look at where people are rebuilding now around here, and I'm just like, oh my God, the next fire, those people are going to die. I mean, it's just, it's very frightening. So two things, those are my two lessons, is one, it's not the fire, it's the wind. And second, I think human beings have some responsibility to think about how they use the land, how they interact with the land in wildlands. And, every once in a while, somebody gets attacked by a cougar or a bear. And it's never the cougars and the bears' fault. It's the fact that we moved into their territory. They didn't move into ours. And I sort of feel that way about fire.
That's a good point. And that's another new perspective, I guess, is I haven't heard that part about the wind being a really big factor in some of these. It's always been about the fuel on the ground, the stuff that could burn so quick. So that's good to know too.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there any other questions in the chat? Let me just check for you real quick. I think that's all the questions we have in the chat. I just wanted to ask one more thing, maybe. Do you still find yourself, after all this time, it's been you said about 3 years, do you find yourself still looking or thinking about things you thought you had, but you're like, oh, that was at the old place? Do you run into that a lot?
A few times a week. Yeah, a few times a week. I'm trying to remember the last one. I was, oh gosh, what was it? I was looking for a shepherd's hook, one of those pieces of metal that goes up and has a little question mark at the end that you hang plants on and pots on in the garden. I was looking for a shepherd's hook, and I knew we had one. And I dug all through the garage. I spent 20 minutes looking for the shepherd's hook. And I went to Karen and I said, hey, where's that shepherd's hook? And she said, BF. before fire.
Oh
I
my
said,
God.
"Oh yeah, we had a shepherd's hook. Now I don't have a shepherd's hook anymore." A few times a week, we're looking for a colander, or we're looking for a reciprocating saw, or I don't know what, but it's always, "Oh yeah, we don't have that anymore." And we rebuilt our house to not exactly the same floor plan as the old house. It's similar, but it's not exactly the same. So we did things like we had a laundry room and a bathroom, and we switched those locations. I can't tell you how often I walk into the laundry room expecting it to be a bathroom. Flip on a switch, and I'm always surprised every time where I end up. We used to have a big clock beside our front door, and every time I still go in and out that door, I look up to see what time it is. And it hasn't been there for 3.5 years, but I still look up expecting to see the clock on the wall. So that kind of thing, it stays with you. It's just this muscle memory, and it doesn't make me as sad as it used to, because it's just, geez, I did it again,
Mm-hmm.
But it catches you up, and just when you kind of start thinking that you're never over, but your mind's on something else, something will happen to snap you right back to it.
Yeah, I can completely understand that. I just was thinking about that. That would be something I think that would keep coming back. But I like what you did with the gates, the iron gates you had in your yard, and you put them in the backyard
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
the planter or the.
Yeah, they're in the corner by a bird bath. We had a little mound of dirt in the back corner of our yard that we asked all the building guys not to touch, because frankly, because we've got a few pets buried back there. That's where we put our late dog and a couple of cats. So we didn't want them digging them up. So we taped it off, and we said, "Do not dig here, don't build here, don't scrape it, don't flatten it, don't do anything." And so we left that corner there, and it's almost like a little shrine back there
Mhm.
now, because it had a lot of bulb plants. They all survived with no watering, no care for like the 2 years it took us to rebuild our house. Life survived back there. Life
Mhm.
thrived back there. And so we had these black iron gates on the side of our house that melted in the fire a little bit. They warped, and we couldn't use them as gates anymore. But I put them back in that corner, screw them into the fence posts as they're kind of art. It almost makes a little altar back there, and it's a semi-sacred spot for us in our yard. It means a lot to us.
Yeah, it did seem like a nice little memoriam or a little altar, or it looked really nice in the book. I like the picture of it. Um, I think that's all the questions we have. Let's check one more time. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have. And I just want to thank you again so much for being here and sharing your story with us. And we would love it if you could come back once we're open. Our library is being renovated before all this happens. So we'll be
Yeah.
having programs in person again, and we would love to have you back and come and talk with us in person.
Thank you so much. It was just lovely to be able to arrange this, and thank you all for coming, and thank anybody who watches this later as a recording. I appreciate that too.
Yeah, and one more comment from Molly. She said, a line from the book that is so moving. It's unnerving to need both everything and nothing. I'm so grateful that you and Karen are safe.
Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian, so much. And if I'll be sending a survey out to everyone through email after, if you could please fill it out, we'd be grateful. It helps us get more grants like these, like the Book to Action one, and we can learn more about, other authors and things like that. So it helps us a lot. And if you want to check out any books of Brian's, we have them in our library and on an ebook form as well. That's it. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Bye bye.